Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs here at the Jewish Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Dialogue and Discourse, Ben Shahn and Public Art, featuring Damien Davis, Adrienne Elise Tarver, Allison Rudnick, moderated by Thomas Crow. This event is held in conjunction with the exhibition Ben Shahn on Nonconformity, on view in our first floor galleries through October 12th. So if you didn't have a chance to visit tonight, please come back and do so. There are still a number of related public programs coming up this summer, both virtually and on-site, including 3 curator-led tours of the exhibition with Laura Katzman, 3 Thursday evenings in July on the 17th, 24th, and 31st at 6 p.m. For complete details about all of our upcoming events, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news. And now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Allison Rudnick is Associate Curator in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her recent exhibitions include The Art of the Literary Poster, works from the Leonard Lauder Collection, and Art for the Millions, American Culture and Politics in the 1930s. She has published and presented widely on modern and contemporary printmaking practices and visual culture with a focus on art of the United States. Adrienne Elise Tarver is an interdisciplinary artist with a practice that spans painting, sculpture, installation, photography, textiles, and video. Her work addresses the complexity and invisibility of Black female identity, including the history within domestic spaces and the archetype of the all-knowing spiritual matriarch. She has exhibited nationally and abroad, including solo shows at the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art, Wave Hill, and Brick Project Room, and has been commissioned through public projects, including those you'll hear about tonight, through New York MTA, Public Art Fund, and Pulse Art Fair. Tarver holds an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a BFA from Boston University. Damien Davis is an artist whose practice explores historical representations of Blackness by seeking to unpack the visual language of various cultures through craft, design, and digital modes of production. His work has appeared at the Whitney, MoMA, and other museums, and he's the recipient of a Rima Hortman Foundation Community Engagement Grant and has been awarded residencies with the Museum of Arts and Design, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and the Pilchuck Glass School. Davis holds a BFA in Studio Art and an MA in Visual Arts Administration from New York University. And finally, Thomas Crow is the Rosalie Solow Professor of Modern Art at the Institute of Fine Arts. He has authored 2 publications, The Rise of the 60s, American and European Art in the Era of Dissent, and the essay collection, Modern Art in the Common Culture, on art and pop in the 20th century. Crow has received numerous honors throughout his career, including a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship, is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and holds honorary degrees from Pomona College and the University of London. Now, with that, if you can please take a moment to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming the guest curator of Ben Shahn on Nonconformity, Laura Katzman, to set the stage for tonight's conversation.
Welcome. I want to thank the Jewish Museum leadership for recognizing the significance of Ben Shahn and bringing Ben Shahn back into the public consciousness as a consequential and influential figure in 20th century American art. Special thanks to my collaborator, Jewish Museum Curator Stephen Brown, and thanks to the Jewish Museum's Education Department, especially Nellie Benedict, Jenna Weiss, and Libby Kendall, for their immensely creative work in putting this program together, which is the first public program organized in conjunction with Ben Shahn on Nonconformity, the first retrospective of Shahn's art in the United States in nearly 50 years. The exhibition was organized by the Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid and adapted by the Jewish Museum, which has constituted a kind of homecoming for Ben Shahn. This thematic and contextual exhibition has many goals, two of which I'll mention here. First, to examine Shahn's artistic commitment to social justice through our own contemporary lens, with the understanding of its timeliness, its relevance, and its currency in our present moment. And second, to illuminate the often underappreciated complexities of Shahn's art and its layered richness. The layered richness, that is, of his aesthetic, his engagement with photography, mass media, commercial illustration, as well as his experimentation with some of the most cutting-edge art movements of his time, abstraction, conceptual art, etc. The exhibition reappraises all of this under the umbrella of nonconformity. Shahn's own credo, which he formulated in the early Cold War, that is his belief that artists must be nonconformists, work against convention, speak their truth, no matter how unfashionable, and they must do this in order to move art and society forward. Another thread that runs through our exhibition is Shahn's relationship to public art. Shahn, like most artists, hated labels: social realist, figurative artist, political artist, but I feel certain that he would have embraced the label of public artist. In fact, Shahn was the consummate public artist. And you see him here in a labor union office in New York City, the Congress of Industrial Organizations from 1945. As I said, he was the consummate public artist. He gravitated to reproductive media, photographs, prints, posters, commercial illustrations, media that spoke to broad publics. And he immersed himself in the public art projects of his day. Thank you. As I said, he immersed himself in the public art projects of his day. He was a strong advocate of government support of the arts and believed that federal patronage of the arts was the great leveler of artists of different styles, different economic status, and different political ideologies. You're going to hear much more about Shahn as a New Deal public artist from Allison Rudnick. So I'll actually end my remarks by calling your attention to two mural studies, which are in the exhibition, one of which you see here. I'm just going to bring it up very briefly. These are studies for government-commissioned murals, excuse me, and the two studies I'm going to show you are special to the Jewish Museum iteration of the exhibition. I bring these up because these murals exemplify some of the challenges that Shahn had to contend with in his day. That is, how to work for government patrons and stay true to his artistic vision, or rather, how to use the platform of government art to make his own social commentary. In this study for the Jersey Homesteads mural of 1936, a mural about Eastern European Jewish immigration to America at the turn of the 20th century, this is an example of how he used, at that time, recent historical subject matter to comment on current events in the 1930s. And as I said, Allison is going to speak more deeply about this work. And the second mural study is the study for the meaning of Social Security, which was a mural made in 1940 to 42 in what was the Social Security building in Washington, D.C. The study that we kind of discovered for this exhibition is a buon fresco, a true fresco. It's called Harvesting Wheat. It's actually a fresco fragment that Shahn did in preparation for this most prestigious mural in his career. In this mural, Shahn at once celebrates the achievement of the Social Security Act of 1935 with this uplifting image of a farmer and his abundant harvest, an image that served to boost morale in the late Depression era. But it also offers a critique of the Social Security Act and its limitations, as the act in 1935 did not actually cover farmers. Shahn clearly navigated the terrains of public art in fascinating ways, and I hope that these two examples can add to our larger discussion on Shahn and public art, the subject of our panel tonight. So with this, I now turn the stage over to the distinguished panelists. Thank you for coming.
right. Hi, everyone. I just want to begin my presentation by thanking Jenna Weiss and Libby Candell of the Education Department here at the museum for the invitation and for putting together this fabulous program. And of course, Dr. Laura Katzman for her exhibition, phenomenal exhibition, and incredible scholarship over the last, I think, 3 decades. That's contributed so much to our knowledge of Shahn's work. I'm going to speak today about Shahn's public art in the 1930s, and specifically about his association with one of the New Deal government agencies, for which he worked for a few years, and can hone in on just a few of the works that he made through that association. So to begin, in 1933, the height of the Great Depression, nearly 13 million people in the United States, about a quarter of the workforce, were unemployed. In response, the newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched the New Deal, a sweeping series of federal programs and reforms designed to put people back to work and kickstart economic recovery. One of these programs was the Resettlement Administration, later called the Farm Security Administration, which I'll be referring to as the RAFSA for short. The RAFSA was established in 1935 under the Department of Agriculture to provide aid to and relocate impoverished farmers in rural areas decimated during the Dust Bowl, a period of severe dust storms caused by drought and poor land management exacerbated by the Depression. Ben Shahn was hired by the RAFSA shortly after its founding. He worked for its Special Skills Division, where he was tasked with creating posters publicizing the agency's activities. The Special Skills Division's aims were twofold: to spread awareness about it among those who can benefit from its offerings, and to shape public opinion in its favor, as the New Deal faced widespread criticism for excessive government spending. Here on the left, we see Years of Dust, a poster Shahn created for the agency in 1936, and it's among one of his best-known works in the medium. In it, a dejected farmer hunches forward, his head resting in his hands. Draped over his leg is a newspaper with a headline referencing the Dust Bowl. And in the background, a young boy peers through the window, signaling that the farmer carries the weight of providing for his family. And at the right is a poster by Shahn's future wife, Bernarda Bryson, who also worked for the Special Skills Division. Titled A Mule and a Plow, it conveys a slightly more hopeful message by illustrating the positive impact of RAFSA small loans, which, as the caption in the poster states, give farmers a new start. And as you can see, the farmer in the poster is directly based on one of Shahn's photographs. Shortly after Shahn was hired, he was sent by the agency on a 3-month trip across the South to take photographs that he could use as source material for his posters, and in this case, Bryson's poster. Roy Stryker, the director of the agency's photography unit, took notice of Shahn's photographs, deeming them so strong and impactful that he arranged for them to be included in the unit's archive, alongside iconic works by staff photographers such as Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans. After leaving the Special Skills Division in 1938, Shahn brokered a short-term appointment with the unit to photograph in the Midwest. And here we see 3 examples of photographs that Shahn took during his trip to the South in 1935, where he photographed men, women, and children picking cotton on the Alexander Plantation in Pulaski County, Arkansas. In the image at bottom left, immense bags of cotton drag behind these figures. Though they were paid, they earned a mere 60 cents per 100 pounds of cotton picked. The images conjure the impact of slavery in the South and the continuation of its legacy in the Jim Crow era, offering an implicit critique of racial discrimination and bringing awareness to the tensions between those realities and the democratic ideals promoted by the New Deal government. During the same trip through the South, Shahn traveled to Natchez, Mississippi, where he encountered the two churchgoers seen in the photograph at left. Their somewhat stodgy, buttoned-up appearance is juxtaposed with the image of a youthful, attractive woman peddling cigarettes in an advertisement affixed to a window shutter at the right. I'm just going to point that out. It's a little hard to see here. That's what that is. A contrast that seemed to amuse the artist. He later included a mirror image of the two women, which it's a little dark, but you can see them here, in a painting of 1939 titled Self-Portrait Among Churchgoers. The artist inserted his self-portrait at left, you can see him there holding a camera, captured in the act of taking a photograph of a scene beyond the confines of the composition, of something we, the viewers, cannot see. Through her in-depth scholarship, Dr. Katzman has brought to light Shahn's extensive use of archival source material for his paintings, including the photographs he took for the RAFSA, demonstrating how he used these images as active tools in the construction of his work, and that influenced his painting style, things that we see manifested quite clearly in this example. In addition to posters and photographs, Shahn, in partnership with Bryson, created a mural for the RAFSA's Jersey Homesteads project between 1936 and 1938, which Dr. Katzman referenced just a few moments ago. The Jersey Homesteads, now called Roosevelt, was a planned community established by the agency in central New Jersey, and where Shahn and Bryson eventually settled in 1939. It was designed as a cooperative community for Jewish garment workers, many of them recent immigrants, providing the opportunity to relocate from the tenements and sweatshops of New York City to a semi-rural setting with affordable housing, access to educational resources, and communal farming and garment production. The mural, located in the lobby of the homesteads, now the Roosevelt's public school building, which at the time served as the central community space for the cooperative, presents a three-part narrative. The left section depicts Eastern European Jewish immigrants arriving in the United States, leaving behind the pogroms and persecution they endured back home. The middle section, which you see here, shows garment workers on the job alongside scenes of labor union organizing. And at right around here, the workers are presented engaged in cooperative farming production and planning their utopian New Jersey community. And as Dr. Katzman just mentioned, in the exhibition, there is included one of Shahn's studies for this mural, which we just saw. And in it, you'll have to go see it in the exhibition because it's a very small detail, but in it you see that Shahn initially depicted Jews praying at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which was a refuge for them outside of Europe. But in the final mural, he changed the location from Jerusalem to New York City. That's in this upper area right over here. And he also added to the composition Albert Einstein, who immigrated to the US in 1933. You could see him right over there. And as the label for the exhibition, for the study in the exhibition points out, Shahn thus merged the first wave of Eastern European immigration of the 1880s to the early 1900s with the more recent exodus of Jews fleeing Nazi Germany. To conclude, Shahn's association with the RAFSA allowed him to create public works across a variety of media through which he expressed his leftist, pro-labor views. Though he had great admiration for the New Deal, he did not shy away from critiquing government policy and ideology in his public works, sometimes directly and other times more obliquely. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Adrienne Elise Tarver, and I'm coming to you in this panel as a contemporary artist who has made a public project, and so there's lots of overlap, especially as I was privileged to have a walkthrough of the exhibition with Dr. Katzman of the process and interest of an artist approaching work in public space during tumultuous political, social times. Unfortunately, there's lots of parallels you see, as history tends to be cyclical. But I'm approaching this from my own personal identity as a Black woman, and my work centers around Black female identity. And one thing I think about, as my work does not tend to, I don't make political posters, my work does not tend to sort of necessarily on the face have political overtones, but one quote that comes to mind that I wanted to pull up and not butcher, so excuse me while I read it, is from Emma Amos. It's always been my contention that for me, a Black woman artist, to walk into the studio is a political act. I feel that very deeply, and so I think anytime I'm bringing work out into the world, I have this kind of in my head. And I was able to work with the Public Art Fund last year, and this project was not only about bringing work into political space, but through multiple cities. So it was the most public my work probably could ever be, on bus stops, bus shelters in Boston, New York, and Chicago, 300 total. This is in Boston. There are 6 works that are part of the project. This one is the smallest in real life of the work, and the work is reproduced enlarged for the bus stops. And the process of thinking about what my work might look like in public space really brought me more directly to the political conversation. The first place I started was researching bus stops, and the company that has the space, the ad space on the bus stops, JC&Co, has a whole explanation on their website about the bus shelter and the invention of the bus shelter and bringing this space to rest for the everyday traveler. And I'd really been thinking about that act of sitting, and also the gravitas and importance they were placing on that in this description of bus stops, because I hadn't really thought about them that much. And it really came to me, this idea that as a Black woman sitting, just existing, as I said, Emma Amos's quote, to walk into the studio, but really to walk into any space in particularly the United States of America, has political overtones. And so the idea of sitting has been and is consistently a political act. So I was beginning to think about what that means and what that has meant through history, thinking about freedom rides, sit-ins, school integration, all acts of sitting and existing. And so I scoured my personal archives, and also an archive that's particularly important to me are the Ebony and Jet magazine archives, as they speak particularly to Black history and Black culture through many decades of not just tumult, but many advances in many different things, and has quite a wide range of images and articles on Black life and Black culture. So I've looked to these archives a lot. This one is actually from my own personal archive. This is the one painting that is of my mother, who passed away right before this project was realized. But this is a direct reference to an Ebony magazine cover, and thinking about these moments documented in the archive. So to see in the Ben Shahn exhibition the relationship between photography and image, and the archive and his own photographs was really exciting for me, because that's been an important part of my practice. This is the one image called A Long Way that is from an actual, I guess, what term do we use? Protest. This is a church group that was sitting in a park taking a rest, a prayer from the other side of the scene, where police breaking up the peaceful protests with hoses. And so I particularly look for images that might have context, historical context and relevance to deep moments, troubling moments, revelatory moments, but not necessarily that specific site of action. This one And many of the images in, many of the images in this, this 6 painting series are also referencing a fictional character that I've created as a part of the work, Vera Otis, who allows me I use her as a surrogate to speak to the different histories and the different conversations that I want to address in the work. So I'll leave it there.
It's always the fun part, setting it as high as possible. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to just sort of start from a place of gratitude. Thank you to the Jewish Museum for this invitation, and also thank you to all the panelists, and to you especially, with the tour you gave us earlier today. Sort of fun, I guess fun or interesting fact is my maternal grandfather was 63 when my mother was born in 1955. So my grandfather was actually born in the 1800s. I never got a chance to meet him or know him, but there's something particularly poetic about this exhibition, which spans a time when my grandfather was the same age that I am now. So there's something about being able to sort of experience this exhibition and understand the world that we were in then, but also it feeling very similar to the world that we're in now. So just want to thank you for that. I like having title cards because it gives the appearance that I have my life together. I'll be talking about a single public art piece that was done through MTA Arts called Empirical Evidence. Empirical Evidence is a 400 square foot mural made out of water jet cut aluminum, which spans 8 panels along the 3rd Avenue Bridge in Mount Vernon. When I was in sort of the finalist stage for developing this project, me and Tara Foster, who was sort of my handler through MTA at the time, we were riding up the Metro North to visit the site, and I very innocently asked, who else is in the running for this thing? And she listed off some very impressive names, and I told her we should just turn around now and go home because there's no way I'm going to get this. But there was something kind of freeing that happened in that moment. I think that this feeling of not being able to win the prize or get the thing becomes very liberating. And for me, the challenge then became, how can I make something that feels as true to myself as possible versus building a public art project that I think would serve the immediate community or maybe even like pander to them in ways that I might not have been cognitively thinking of at the time. Miraculously, they wound up choosing it. But I think a lot of it had to do with the sort of history of Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon is a sort of historically black community, which through infrastructure had been kind of bisected. When they were building the Metro North sort of trough for the trains, I think because in large part that Mount Vernon was a black town, there was not the same sort of level of care and consideration in the way that the infrastructure impacted the town. So they had the train line literally cut through the center of Mount Vernon, creating this divide between the north and the south. The north was where all the like City Hall, the infrastructure was there, and then to the south was where the residents resided. So for a 10-year span, the bridges that connected the north and south of Mount Vernon were in such disrepair they had to close many of them down, which meant that people could not get to the north and south side of their own city for a decade. This bridge represents, and this is actually from the ribbon cutting of the bridge. For the first time in 10 years, a fire truck was able to cross over to the other side of town. Yes. So even just thinking about being able to get groceries, thinking about the sort of response times of police, of the fire department, all of that had been impacted for a very long time. You're going to look at a lot of other, hopefully pretty, pictures of the bridge. But the thing that I kind of want to talk about most is this idea that we as artists who began engaging with sort of government systems, infrastructure systems to build these projects, like Ben Shahn, we're constantly sort of navigating between our own artistic vision, the public, and then how to navigate these systems, which requires a lot of negotiation, both on a technical standpoint, an emotional standpoint, and logistics standpoint. But what ends up happening is like we don't always necessarily get it right. And I'm still not sure if I've fully gotten it right. The bridge itself represents an amalgamation of my practice, which is largely about thinking through language, particularly the messiness of language, the way that language fails us, the way that it sort of undermines like basic human connection at times. So I like to make work that feels discursive. I like making things that rely on objects, shapes, and patterns that allow the viewer to sort of do the sort of discursive work amongst themselves to figure out what they're looking at. But then also hopefully functioning in a way that feels accessible, in a way that feels intuitive for the viewer. Museums like this are amazing because they're really deep in their knowledge and their ability to educate, but at the same time, they can also be very intimidating for folks. The great thing about public art is that you're meeting people where they're at. You're giving them the tools to hopefully build conversations that are meaningful for them, but also shape the history and the identity of a particular community. It's always my hope that the work that I make, whether you have a PhD or whether you barely have a high school diploma, you're able to start building language around work. So I'm always thinking about ways that are accessible, ways that are visually generous, and similar to Ben Shahn in that he, especially through the poster work and the mural work, was always thinking about how to engage these conversations that are very fraught, very difficult, very complicated, with a public that maybe has like a deep nuance and understanding, but sometimes might have only a surface level understanding. Pretty things, hopefully. So again, things that sort of speak to the history of Mount Vernon, so like Black Power, transportation, Afrocentric histories. Yeah, so it's water jet cut aluminum. My practice largely involves laser cut acrylic held together with traditional hardware. I also am very interested and invested in materials that feel relatively democratic, materials that don't necessarily, and might be like a larger concept to unpack, I'm interested in visually legible modes of production that don't fetishize the artistic hand the way that traditional art mediums do. So the way that we tend to fetishize a brushstroke or the press into a piece of clay. I like the idea that a piece of hardware becomes another form of labor that we don't necessarily associate with like high art, but feels like a tactile sort of muscle memory thing that anybody can sort of access, if that makes sense. So the pieces are built through the same sort of process as I do in my studio with the laser cutter. It's just high-pressured water that's cutting through metal. And then it's all held together with large industrial sort of hardware. We were there for the installation of it, and I commented, "Oh, this is very similar to what I do in the studio. Can somebody give me a socket wrench?" They said no. Liability, I'm sure. But I do kind of want to leave on this quote: public art isn't just about what's visible, it's about who gets to decide what visibility means. And I think like Ben Shahn, like with what Adrienne's doing, what everyone is doing with their work, it's about offering a lens to see what's inside of us, but hopefully in a way that allows for people to see things within themselves. Yeah, I hope so. Thank you. I believe in art, I believe in the discursive power of it, and I believe in its ability to help us all connect to each other on a human level. So, Thank you.
Okay. Yes, this is it on? Yeah, this, the awkward rituals of these events. I'm Thomas Crow, and I am an art historian, not a practitioner or not a curator. So I take, I don't know, I suppose a slightly distant view from all these things, or detached view, which just comes with the territory. I don't feel detached from any of this material. So maybe that's a good way to engage my fellow panelists who are close to it and deeply engaged. The fact that both of your projects have to do with public transportation, the ones you showed. And we just think about public transportation as a practical matter and something that is an essential element of social provision and the common good, which is, for those reasons, is kind of always under stress and is never really quite adequate to the needs of people who depend upon it. And I am, in my own mind, a great advocate for public transportation, which I won't do the personal side of it. In any event, I was really, really intrigued to see this emerge. And it also brings up I don't want to make this question too long, but it brings up the 1930s as a time when, out of necessity, the country had to make social investments. And the trouble is, today we're still living on those social investments to a great degree. And when you look at Ben Shahn, he began, as you see in the exhibition, as a protest artist, someone who was in the tradition of Zola, saying, "J'accuse, this is all wrong." He even did a series on the Dreyfus affair. But when the crisis struck at the end of the 20s and it led to Roosevelt's election and the founding of the New Deal, which was to prime the pump, to build things, to get the economy going on the public side rather than the failed private side. So many of the things that we depend on in this city were created. And Damien was working with some of those elements and describing the way in which, a more heartless approach to public transportation had caused, real distress and dysfunction for the people in this, slightly distressed town of Mount Vernon. Ben Shahn moved from his protest position with the election of Roosevelt to an advocate, to someone who was working on the inside, though he wasn't always entirely in harmony. For example, his keen sense that the benefits of the New Deal needed to be spread across the races and the ethnicities of this country, which it wasn't always. So I guess I'm really asking, and I think all of you might have something to say about this, the way in which the present is one of kind of miserly meagerness in public provision. Ben Shahn's period was one where there was at least a qualified abundance and mission to build for all the people. And looking at his art at that moment and your art in this moment, can you do something with that?
I can go first.
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess there were maybe a couple things in there that sort of stuck out for me, because when I think about the history of infrastructure in this country, I think about places like Seneca Village, you know, where Central Park stands now. I think about Robert Moses. I think about folks that, in the name of progress, were willing to sort of decimate the kinds of communities that I came from. I mean, I was born in rural Louisiana, and when you look at the South is littered with thriving black communities that were sort of wiped out, decimated, burnt to the ground, and then had like lakes filled in. A lot of the man-made lakes in the South are where like thriving black communities once stood. So it's challenging for me when I interface with folks like MTA Arts, not because those people aren't amazing to work with, and you know the work is really beautiful and challenging and exciting. It has more to do with understanding the sort of machine that I'm inserting myself into, and all the ways in which that work is sort of fraught and potentially sort of dangerous or violent to the communities that I'm trying to work with. This is a very roundabout way of me saying I don't have any real answer.
Well, no, I mean, I'm glad you brought it to the South. I have a long history in Atlanta, lived in Atlanta for a large portion of my childhood. My dad's side of the family's all from Georgia, and it is an infamous city for its campaigning to not have public transportation, precisely for the idea that it provides access to communities that people want to keep separate, so there's this space of, I think public transportation has a very complicated history, and locally, you can see how it swings and how it affects the communities and has very long-term effects. If you've been to Atlanta recently, the traffic is awful. And that's because they have consistently kept any mode of public transit, which we also know it's not just about our commute to work, it's about climate, it's about like much larger things that you see the impact of racism really having deep, long-term, really difficult to change impacts. So to look at a bus system in New York, I mean, I have friends, my dad lives in Atlanta, I have good friends in other cities who were saying, oh, can it come to my city? And like, you don't have a good bus system, you know? And that's the reality, is this kind of public work that I did for this project only exists in a robust, a city with robust infrastructure, public transportation.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think something that I see in both of your work and the work of Shahn is this approach to public art that is very nuanced and layered, and you can read so many different meanings into the work. And we learned we had the privilege of having a tour with Laura of the exhibition before the panel, and it was something I didn't know was in the posters that Shahn made in the 40s and the post-war period, many designs were rejected, and it might have been because in many cases the messages embedded in the posters were too complicated, too nuanced. Posters are meant to send a simple, direct message that can be understood immediately. That's what makes a successful poster. But Shahn didn't think that way, and he didn't work that way. He was such a, the way that he approached the New Deal was he both lauded the New Deal and critiqued it at the same time. And so much of his messaging is layered in that way. And I see that in your works as well, this kind of deep meaning that, you could kind of capture one meaning immediately, but then you really need to spend time and think about it to kind of understand the richness of it. And there's a kind of interesting interplay or negotiation, I think, that artists, it seems, I don't want to speak for the artists on the stage, I'm not an artist myself, but that I imagine artists have to engage in when you're creating a work for these kind of bureaucratic public serving institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I would, just to add on to that, say that, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like that's maybe the hardest part, because when we look at the period of Ben Shahn, we also didn't have to compete with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all these things that just make the attention span even shorter. So how do you sort of make something that's long-lasting, that engages with a community that is sort of, we're in a period now where the public is uniquely trained to scan things so quickly, make a snap decision on whether or not that thing they're looking at is in alignment with their own personal values, and if they deem that it's not, dismiss it completely. Yeah.
I'm going to say 100%. And I think one of the things I was very conscious about in the images that I created for the Public Art Film Project, but I think about this in general, is like to kind of piggyback on this idea of what social media has done to our consumption of visual culture and visual media, is the like thumbnail, the like extreme, you know, like, sorry if this is like for like a reference for those who like aren't on YouTube all the time, but the like thumbnail that's like the super extreme, like, you know, watch what I can eat, or something that's just like ridiculous, but it has nothing to do with the video, but it's to grab your attention. And I very consciously focus on a quiet moment, one, because I'm tired. As a woman, as a Black woman, as a person in this country, I'm tired, and I wanted to center a quiet moment of rest, and I also wanted to kind of challenge this idea of the extreme. But the works are bright, and that's very conscious too. It's like a stop sign. It's bright yellow, and it's bright pink, and it's bright, you know, bright blue, and so there's this like competition for message as well as attention. And like, how do you catch attention and then ask for quiet or ask for slowness is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, I just had a thought that from an art historian's perspective, in the 19th century realism, there emerged a great interest in the laboring classes, and that became a central motif for artists, but one that was very popular with a bourgeois public. And there's been, I think, some interesting insight into that as to how you show, someone who works the peasant labor in the countryside, or works in a factory, or who is a woman who irons sheets in terribly hot conditions all day long. Degas, of course, did that. And the very exceptional representation of a laboring subject is not in the act of doing the labor, which then the labor defines them. And it becomes a picture of the labor rather than the subjective reality of the person who's doing it. And the only way you can get out of that, my friends John Barrow and Lyndon Lachlan were people who kind of came to this conclusion, was to show them not laboring, which is an exceptional state, but finding a way, like Millet's Man with the Hoe, where he's leaning on the hoe. He's not actually, chopping a furrow or anything. And I thought of that when I was seeing your women sitting, refusing, or just really gathering themselves and capturing some kind of personal autonomy.
No, I think that's a perfect relationship and parallel to that, in that the idea of being able to be a portraiture in painting, and the works, most of the works in my series are oil paintings. Like, that's a history of depicting royalty and heads of state, and a portrait of somebody sitting is generally to glorify a position of power. But to depict somebody who is in no professed position of power at rest is radical. It was radical then, and it's radical now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And somehow, not to harp on the public transportation theme, but the people who depend on it, the women who depend on it, have to get to their jobs and so on, would be, I think, a great audience for what you provided.
Yeah, I mean, I just to add on to that, I think that, and this is just my personal opinion, I think that we're in a period now where the people who are the best at storytelling are going to be the ones that are able to sort of shape culture. And what has been sort of particularly exciting for me to see in this moment right now as sort of immigrants are being attacked left and right is this idea that we can talk about the value of immigrants outside of talking about what they do for us. We can separate the labor that they do from their humanity. And the more that we can sort of center stories, center storytelling around like just the basic humanity of all people, the more good work we can do, I think.
Yeah, because the sort of neoliberal justification for immigration is how well they're going to serve us. And I think seeing the person as in Ben Shahn's photographs and the paintings he derived from them, you got to give him credit. He was looking for that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about those 3 photos that I showed. If this doesn't take too long, I might go back. Sorry. These of the cotton pickers. The 2 images on the left do show people at work, but this really striking photo at right does refuse that, and there's such a humanity. I mean, it's such a striking photo, and so many of Shahn's photographs, which, as I mentioned, weren't actually meant initially to be part of this archive in the way that Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans and Arthur Rothstein's were. They were for him. They were meant as source imagery. They still had this incredible power that I think, I mean, that Roy Stryker, who was the head of the photography unit, saw and said, we gotta incorporate these into this archive but he's, this is an example of, I think, him doing exactly what we're talking about.
This is 1935?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, my grandfather would have been younger than me
Wow.
in these photos, yeah.
Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah, the really amazing elegance of the standing, non-working, confronting, youngish woman at the right is just an amazing thing to capture.
And,
And she looks more elegant than those 2 stuffy women, walking down.
Here they are. I would agree.
Shade.
Just to add to this too, when we were walking through the exhibition, it was pointed out that there was this one poster of a worker wearing a Band-Aid on his finger, and yes, he's shown in the process of working, of building, of engaging in construction, but that kind of touch of humanity that makes him feel so real and so relatable. I mean, why did he put a Band-Aid on his finger? We don't know, but it does kind of bring a humanity to this figure that, as Laura mentioned, is really contrasts with the images that we all can, I'm sure, imagine if we, have a kind of image in our head of the kind of Russian or Soviet, strong, often bare-chested laborer of this period who is larger than life, heroic, and idealized. These images that Shahn made of workers were not idealized by any means. And I don't know, I see a relationship there as well.
A touch like that, a detail can take a type out of typology. And typing people, of course, is a form of objectification. It is a reduction of the full humanity to some existing category or some assigned task, which I don't think is the function of art, not art at its highest level. Sorry, Adrienne.
No, to speak to that, I mean, I loved what you said about taking it out of type, because I think what it speaks to is observation, and what we often are taught. I definitely was taught to observe and to look more closely and to include these observations. And so it's not a type if it is observed, it's a real thing. And so a detail like a Band-Aid makes that human being that was observed, was seen, and then recorded, and then that becomes the message, as opposed to this idealized version of what productivity looks like for America.
I was very struck by the couple of images towards the latter part of the exhibition of blind subjects, and which it could be a trap, a trap of a kind of sentimental typology of of a distressed person, of a person you can feel sorry for and feel some self-congratulatory sympathy for. But in the case of the blind accordionist, I hope you've had a chance to see it. It's a powerful painting. It was from a photograph he took in an urban situation, but he set the person against a bare landscape, a kind of post-battlefield sort of landscape. And it was a black and white photo. In the painting, the accordion becomes this splendid sculptural ornamented object. It's right in the middle, and of course our eye goes right to it. We're being lavished with a rich visual experience, which then you realize the figure, who was a real person, can't see it. He only knows his instrument through his fingers and his body, and the visual part of it, which Shahn has emphasized, is only for us. So we have to measure our, ableness, against a figure who is, in a way, in touch with something deeper and more important than our mere visual experience. So that's another way in which this quest on his part to find visual signifiers that can bring you to a real person when it's just a flat pattern of colors on a panel.
I think, the shadows that the piece cast onto the sidewalk were very much intentional. It was something that I wanted the piece to sort of live throughout the day and have different experiences. Something that I didn't talk about was some of the technical limitations. Because it was working through the MTA, they have a very limited amount of colors that you're able to use. I don't know if you've ever noticed, unless it's sort of tiled mosaic work, it needs to be built in a way that's resilient enough to sort of handle graffiti, defacement. So the MTA has a very limited palette that you're sort of forced to work with. And the workaround for that, and I'm glad actually that you brought up the light, because light did play a big factor in the production of this. The way that we had the fabricators sort of grind patterns into the metal, either in a circular motion, wavy motion, zigzag motion, those were done with the intention of having the light bounce off those panels in very different ways during different times of day. So while it's the same, and the images sort of flatten this out, but while it's the same three colors in repetition, the way that we had them grind patterns into the metal in different ways forced them to behave very differently throughout the day. But also this idea of time. Again, like my grandfather was born a couple centuries ago, and my mother and father were born in like rural Louisiana. They were the first in their town to integrate the local high school. And then my mother, who didn't like that experience at all, went to an HBCU, and then she wound up teaching high school for 37 years. So education, history, Black history, has always been like part of the soup for me. And thinking about how you integrate that into activism and art is something that I can never really divorce myself from.
I think that's a great sentiment to end on, just because I do want to be conscious of time while we're talking about time. I hope you'd be okay if people come up to you to ask like a final question as we wrap up. So we have a few minutes if folks want to see the exhibition downstairs. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you to our panelists.